welcome to a new video. This is Sylvie here, and today we're going to be playing some flight simulator. So we're going to be flying the TBM 930. It's a single engine turboprop aircraft. It's a fun plane to fly in flight simulator, and we're going to be flying it from Faro in Portugal, yeah, okay, to Gibraltar, obviously, which is a UK place at the tip of Spain. So what I've done is I've set the time back a bit from the live time. But I have got live weather, and we're going to be doing the whole checklist. We're going to be doing it all from scratch, and we're going to be following the checklist, and we're going to be doing it. I just wanted to show you guys what it's like to actually do a proper flight on this, because it's not as simple as just get in, take off, unless you set it to the runway, in which case it does all the checklist for you. Anyway, I'm going off on a ramble. Let's go. Okay, here we are. We are at Faro Airport. There's a weird sticky uppy mountain over there. I don't know what that is. It's probably a glitch, because this game does have a few glitches at times. So let's just take a quick look outside, shall we? So here we are. This is the plane. This is Faro. Looking quite warm and nice here, even though it is January. It's just got a kind of warm feeling, hasn't it? Right, so the TBM, it's not that hard of an aircraft to start. As you can see, there's lots of displays, so it's quite modern instruments. It's not that difficult, and it's quite easy when it comes to the aircraft in this game, especially something like an A320 or a 747. Those are really hard. So let's start with the inside inspection. Okay, so we're just going to make sure the plane's all set up before we start going. So we're going to have a look at the exterior lights. So we're going to see it says exterior lights must be switched off. So we'll go up and we'll have a look at the exterior lights. Off is the bottom, and they're all on the bottom. The landing and taxi lights off, so the exterior lights are off. So we'll tick that one. Interior lights off, same kind of thing, all off. So we'll tick that. Crash lever, which is this big black and yellow thing, that's down. Tick that. Starter off, so that's the starter there. That's off. If I lift the crash lever, you'll see it's off is the middle setting, so it's off. Ignition auto, yep. Aux boost pump off. It is off. Fuel selector manual. AP and trim, which is the autopilot and the trim system for the aircraft. We'll leave that off. DI system all off, so I believe the DI system is down here. I'm actually going to click on the yoke to get rid of it, so you can see all of the DI switches are off, so we'll tick that. Inert SEP, which is the inertial separator, which stops debris from getting into the engine on takeoff, which is off as well, because it's part of the same panel as the de-ice. I'm not sure why it's part of the de-ice panel. I'd have to look that up, because as far as I know, it's got nothing to do with de-icing. It's more for stopping stuff. I can't remember exactly how it works, but it stops sort of stuff that gets caught in the intake from actually entering the engine, if I remember right. So anyway, it's off. Parking brake is on, which I believe, well, I can experiment with this with the key combination. Let me have a look, because I need to remember where that button is. So let's make sure numlock is on first of all. Right, numlock's on. Okay, so it's just this little thing down here. Okay, that's fine. So that's on anyway, that's all good. I think it comes on by default. Landing gear lever, the little wheels at the bottom, is down. Bleed. So the bleed is the flow of air from the engines to the cabins, so for stuff like air conditioning and pressurization, if I remember correctly from my aviation knowledge. And the bleed is off, so let's just double check. Okay, so the bleed here is off, yeah. So the bleed is for the pressurization, so it basically takes some of the air coming from the engine and also dump some of the air in the plane out as well to keep that pressure. So obviously if we fly above something like 10,000, 11,000 feet, if it wasn't pressurized, we'd have trouble, not asphyxiating the plane. So, like airliners, it's pressurized, so just need to make sure that's off before we start. Throttle cut off, this is the throttle lever down here. There are a few steps to this. The main ones we'll use when we're actually flying is this sort of mark on the left, so this kind of path. This one here we only use when we're starting it up. But anyway, it's off. It's on feather at the bottom of feather, so that's fine. Fuel tank selector open or left or right. Open on left and right. Okay, so this basically allows us to choose what fuel tank is used. So planes like this will have two fuel tanks. Smaller planes, they'll have one in the right wing and one in the left wing. Now on smaller planes that are less advanced, you'll actually have to select these manually. So obviously you'll select it to pull from the left tank, and then once the left tank is drained a bit, obviously it'll be out of balance because the right tank's still got more fuel in it. So that's the point where you'll switch over to the right tank and you wait for that to drain below the left and so forth, and you'll basically keep them balanced the whole time. It's a bit of a sort of housekeeping thing when you're flying, and it can be a little bit of a pain sometimes when you just forget and your plane starts veering over and you're like, why is it doing that? Oh, the fuel's imbalanced by like several hundred kilograms. Now I do believe that the TBM has an auto mix in the fuel, perhaps. I can't remember now if it mixes the fuel automatically. If not, then we'll just manually select this. Anyway, I went off on another tangent there, but the fuel tank selector is open because it's not off, and it is on left, which satisfies this. Right, okay, before starting engine, crash lever up, here we go, so we get to lift this coloured lever now. Up you go. Source, battery or GPU. So the difference between these two, a battery is obviously what it says, it's a battery, so the plane has a battery like that your phone does or your car does, which helps you with the electrical stuff when the engine is off. So it's literally just like a car, like when you start it up, obviously you need charging the battery, etc. The GPU stands for the ground power unit, and that is, and the ground power unit is basically like a generator that sits on the tarmac at the airport, and it provides power to the plane. So that's kind of like having someone jumpstart the plane, basically, in a sense. I don't believe we have a GPU at this airport. I don't see any GPU outside. I think it does allow you to use it, even like when you're parked up, like anywhere. But I'm going to use battery to keep it realistic. So, for the source, we're going to select battery. Now what that will do is that'll be the source of the aircraft's power. So I'll just turn off the warnings when I can. If it's going to let me turn the warnings off. There we go. I had to turn the middle screen on first. Right, so we've turned the battery on. That's brought all the avionics and the computers and the instruments on. So obviously if we left it like this for too long, then the battery would drain, and we really don't want that. So we're going to intend to really keep it out of battery, in battery mode for as short as possible. Now you'll see next to this we've got the generator switch. So the source is basically where the plane is pulling its power from, so whether that's the battery or the ground power unit. The generator is what's attached to the engine at the front. So this is literally what it sounds like. This is how it generates power when it's flying. So when that turboprop engine at the front is spinning, then it's going to run current through an alternator, which will generate a current for the rest of the plane. So when you've got the engine running, you want to have that generator on. Now the checklist, as you can see, calls for it to be on main, which means it's basically on. While before you actually start the engine, obviously sort of in preparation. So I'm going to just do that. Make sure that's on main. There we go. De-ice system lights test. So obviously we want to test the de-icing system to make sure it's working before we freeze up at like 16,000 feet, which is going to be the cruising altitude today. So the de-ice system test. So we just click the little test button. You can see all the little lights light up, and that just tells us basically that it's working. Okay. Right, landing lights, gear lights, check. So we're going to have a look at the landing gear now, make sure that system's working properly. So if we, let's see, where's the test? So here we go. So you can see we've got the light test. If we hold down that, it'll test all the lights. So we've got obviously the gear lever light, the gear unsafe light, which tells you if it's unsafe to drop the gear. When we've got the gear indicator light as well, so nose, left and right. So we've tested that, and it also asks us to test the check down function. Now if we click on this, it'll just let us know that it's down, which obviously we want to do on the ground because you don't want the plane collapsing on the ground. That would not be a great outcome. So I'll just tick that. Fuel on board check. This is as simple as it sounds. We're just going to check the fuel on board, and you can see the gauges for the fuel right here. We've got 146 I believe that's gallons. I think that's gallons. Yeah, US gallons. So we've got 146 US gallons in each tank on the left and the right, which is the full amount, which is perfect. So we're fully fueled, so we'll check that. Okay. Now it's time for engine start. So what I'm going to do, if you're wondering about something like, contacting the air traffic control, like you might have seen them doing plane videos, we actually do that after we've already got the engine started, at least in the way I'm doing this. So I'm going to get the engine going first, just because I don't want to drain the battery too much. Once the engine's going, we can sort all of that out. Okay. Right, so the checklist for starting the engine is a little bit more complicated. You've just got to time things properly, and you've got to monitor things. So you can see we've got a bit here where it says motoring if residual ITT is greater than 150 degrees Celsius. What that's saying is if the engine is already running, or if there's already heat in the engine system, then we'll follow these. We'll follow these different steps. We don't have that. If we check in the ITT, you can see it's only 1 degree C at the minute. The outside air temperature, I don't know how it's 1 degree C. I think that's probably below the reading of the temperature because the outside temperature is like 8, so I don't know how it's 1 degree like inside the engine. I think that's just a temperature sensor. Anyway, that's getting off topic. It's not greater than 150 degrees Celsius, obviously, so we're going to ignore that. So now we're going to get on to actually starting the engine. So the ignition needs to be off first of all, so let's just put the ignition to off. There we go. Aux boost pump, which is the pump that puts the extra fuel into the engine, is on. So we'll just put this on. You'll hear it coming on when we do this. Possibly. Not sure if you can hear that. I've got my audio turned quite low. So that's on. Propeller area clear, so we just check out, obviously, to make sure the propeller area is clear, which it is, apart from this guy who's going to push us out. And now we go on to actually starting. So starter on for 2 seconds, then release. So what we need to do here is head over to starter switch, and we'll put it on for 2 seconds. So 1, 2, done. Take that. I can see, you can hear the engine spooling up. And it's saying abort after 30 second match, skip that. Okay, aux boost pump to off. Ignition to auto, so we put the ignition to auto. Okay, aux boost pump on. Propeller area, oh, hang on, okay, propeller area clear, starter, we've done that. Okay, so we're going to set the throttle to low idle. When the NG is 13%, it will already be in, so we'll just put it onto low idle, there we go. I think the checklist got a bit out of order there. Because I went through the motoring on, that's why. Never mind. Okay. ITT max 870 degrees for 20 seconds, so we're just going to monitor the ITT and make sure it doesn't break 870 degrees for 20 seconds. So we're just going to monitor the temperature here, if you can see that. Okay. There we go, it's rising. Okay. Right, now it will go a bit high if I remember right, so we need to put it up to flight idle, which is the next lever up, like this, just because it's weird like that. And then we'll put it across to taxi, just to make sure it doesn't get too hot. There we go, you see the temperature's coming down. The reason for that is that when you've got the propeller in that position, just because of the way the blades are turned, it's actually pushing less air through the engine, so the engine's actually overheating, so it's not being cooled so much. So there we go, so the NG is 30% before 30 seconds, that happened anyway. Oil pressure and temperature check. So the oil pressure here is in the green sector, which means it's fine. The temperature is in the green sector, which means it's fine. Automatic starter off. We'll just turn that off. There we go. Okay, right, after engine start, low idle to flight idle, we've already done that. Oil pressure and temperature check. They are in the green. Aux boost pump. Let me get my words straight. Aux boost pump to auto. Let's do that to auto. Fuel selector to auto. Fuel selector to auto. Now what I think that does is it does balance it, as I was saying. It balances it between the left and right tanks. Fuel selector, shift button, test. Okay, so we're going to push the shift switch. I'm going to check that it switches between the right and left tank. So obviously if we want to manually override the tank while it's on auto, if we press this once, you can see that now moves to the right tank. If I press it again, it will move over to the left tank, which works. Okay, AP trims on. This will allow us to use the autopilot. There we go. Generator must be set to main. It's already on main, which is great. Bleed to auto or max diff. So we'll just make sure the bleed is on auto. You want to use auto unless you need to use max diff. Max diff is saying the maximum differential. So obviously when we're at cruising altitude, the altitude of the air in the plane will be set to about 8,000 feet. So it's not like you have sea level air when you've got the pressurized cabin in the plane. You actually have it at a higher altitude. That's to minimize the kind of stress on the plane, because obviously if you've got a lower altitude outside and it's too big of a difference, and the plane is just going to want to be pushing out the air inside the plane, and that'll put stress on it. So it has about 8,000 feet, which is still perfectly breathable inside the plane. So you want to keep it on auto though, pretty much. Okay, before taxi, so we'll leave this for now because we're not taxiing straight away. And what we'll do now is we'll get the ATC going on. So Let me just get my ATC. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. So the ATC is basically how we talk to the ground control, and we get them to do stuff. So I'm not going to do a pushback just because there's tons of room here. We might knock this guy's head off, but he's not a real person, so we shouldn't feel bad for him. And we're just going to do it that way, just because the pushback controls in Flight Simulator are really awkward, and I could just end up like on the runway just going back. So I'm not going to do that. Okay, right. No problem. So what we're going to do first, we're just going to quickly check the weather. So the ATIS frequency gives us the weather. So let's see. So only a 7-knot wind, 3-mile visibility, and a few clouds. It's nothing that bad. Okay. I'm not sure where these clouds are though. I don't see any clouds. Right, so the key thing here is the altimeter reading of 30.09. That's basically the pressure in inches of mercury of the air outside. It's really important that you set your altimeter to that pressure. So if I grab the altimeter reading, we'll set the backup one so I can show you what you mean. So you can see it's currently at 29.92. Let me just get rid of this, we don't need this anymore. So you can see it's currently at 29.92, which means that's the sort of standard air pressure. So you have a standard air pressure that you go to that's not dependent on weather, but as we do have, you know, local weather here, it's normally this is something that you follow when you're above a certain height, where all the pressure is the same. But basically, we need to set the barometer, so the altimeter. We need to set the pressure to that pressure that they gave us, which is 30.09. So let's put it up to 30.09, there we go, and you can see the altitude here in feet changes when we do that, because obviously altitude is based on air pressure as far as it reads this instrument. So if we set the correct pressure, then we'll get the correct altitude. That's really important because otherwise you'll be at the wrong altitude, and that can be quite dangerous in an instrument flying situation. So we'll also need to change it on the primary flight display, which is this one here, which gives us which is what we'll normally read off. This is just for backup really, so this is in case this fails, which it won't in the simulator. So if we set this to 30.09, like so, you can see we've got the same reading now in the backup and the primary flight displays, which is great, which is ideal. And now what we're going to do is we're going to get the ATC and we're going to get the clearance to the flight, because we're pretty much all ready to start taxiing now. So let's get the IFR clearance, and this will basically clear our flight plan that we've got to Gibraltar. You'll see it here. Okay. So he's saying takeoff runway 10. And 11,000 feet. Okay, so that's important because we need to dial these things into the autopilot now. So just read back the IFR clearance, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the autopilot to that altitude, and we'll also set the heading to 010, which is the runway. So let's set the heading to 010, sorry, not 010, 100, I'm getting that wrong. So let's put it to heading to 100. And we'll set the altitude to 11,000 feet. And you can see the heading here in the autopilot, and you can see the altitude here. So this blue marking, these blue markers are basically what we're setting things to. Okay. And when we turn on the autopilot, it will sort of hold off at that altitude. So let's just set this to 11,000 feet. Okay. Now, when it comes to speed, that's something we have to manage manually in a plane like this because it doesn't have an autothrottle. So the autopilot doesn't control the engine power itself. We still have to do that manually, but that's something that we just have to do as a pilot, basically, while this is flying. Okay, anyway, no problems. Okay, right, so now we're going to request the taxi IFR. What I'm also going to do, while we do this, is I'm going to set up the vertical speed. So the autopilot will climb at a certain rate, which we'll need to set. So if we put on vertical speed mode with this one, and we set, you can see it here, we'll set the vertical speed to something like, let's see, 1800 feet per minute, which is quite a relatively high ascent rate, which should be fine. So it's asking us, we've just got a taxi clearance now, it's saying us to taxi and hold short of runway 10, which is the one going right, using taxiway A, which is alpha. So we'll just need to follow the signs, and then we'll taxi it, we'll use taxiway alpha to get to the runway. So we'll just acknowledge the taxi clearance quick.
taxiing, hold short runway 10 via taxiway Alpha Dover 249er.
Alright. Great. So now what we'll need to do, as we are starting our taxi, we'll need to follow the before taxi checklist. So inert separator, let's switch that on. Flight controls check, so we'll just pull it all the way back, push it in left and right, just make sure it moves fine, do the rudders as well. There we go, absolutely fine. Flaps up, the flap controls here and it's set to up, which is great. Throttle feather twice, so we're going to set it to flight idle quickly. Just wait for the instruments to change, there we go. And then we'll set it back to normal. Okay, it's just telling us that the aux boost pump is on, I think that's fine. And then we'll switch it back to feather again. You'll hear the engine note change, that's just because we're changing the geometry of that propeller, which is fine. Okay. Right then, let's go. So taxi lights on. They're just the lights we need to taxi, so we'll just switch our taxi lights on. What we'll also do, we'll switch on our navigation and strobe lights, which we need for flying. Might as well do that now. I don't think that's in the checklist, but it normally is. And we'll switch the parking brake off, and then we're ready to go. So I'll just switch the parking brake off. There we go. And we'll just make sure on the next checklist when we need to do it. I'll just minimize this as well. And we'll start our taxi. So let's see, taxiway alpha. I'll need to do a little bit of a sort of spin around. So we'll just up the throttle a little bit. Okay, the planes are a bit sticky, so it takes a second to get going, but there we go. Right, so let's just drop it, keep that throttle low. We don't want to go too fast now. Okay. There we go. Right, so what you will notice on this primary flight display in the middle, we've obviously got our attitude here, which is basically telling us where we're pointing. And because this is a Garmin 1000 flight display that we've got here, which is one of these quite popular modern ones, we can actually see kind of like a graphical representation of the world around us and the terrain and everything with it, which is very handy. But what you will see is we've got the attitude indicator here, and then we've got a little pink one. That little pink one is called the flight director, and what that will basically tell us is basically on what the autopilot it wants us to do. So if we are to say use the autopilot without using it, as to say, so we say we engaged the autopilot but we didn't actually turn it on, we just had it telling us where to go and we were following it, then we would follow those markers on there manually ourselves, and that would help us actually follow the path that the autopilot is. If that makes any sense, I probably didn't do a great job of explaining that. Something I'll also do while we're taxiing, you'll notice down here, we've got this little compass, which obviously telling us which direction we're going in. But you'll see there's this green light line across it. That is the current pip that we are actually following. Now that is a VOR thing it's tuned to, which we don't have any tuned about, so it's completely useless. So what we're basically going to do is we're just going to change that so it'll follow the GPS tracker, which is our flight plan along here. And then we'll actually be going the right way. So I'll just change the nav source to FMS. There we go. And you can see now that that green line is lining up with the map. So it will follow our route. It's very important to do as well. Just going to get a bit of a move on because we are taxiing a little bit slowly. Let's pop into outside view as well. Okay. So we're going to want to go right to the end of the runway and then taxi around. And we'll see how that goes. So I might cut this out actually, just because it's a bit of a long process. Okay, so something while we're taxiing as well, some taxi tips. You'll see down here, so obviously we've got our airspeed up here. Now the airspeed only works from about 30 knots. As you can see, it starts at 30 knots and we currently don't have anything in the reading. That's because it just takes a while for the airspeed indicator to actually pick up a reading. You need to be going a certain speed. However, when we're on the ground, we do have a ground speed indicator here, which you can see down here. So this GS one, this one at the bottom, says 12 knots. That's the speed that we're actually travelling across the ground. Which is useful for taxiing at a sensible speed. With the TBM, you don't want to taxi anything really above 15-20 knots, so I'm trying to keep it between 10 and 15 knots while we're taxiing down this taxiway. The true airspeed is, so we've got, this is the indicated airspeed, so this is basically at the top here. This is basically what the sensors on the plane are reading. That can be affected by a lot of things. For example, they can freeze over if you haven't got the anti-icing on. and it's quite high up, obviously, where the temperature's really low. There's a bunch of other things that I won't go into now that can affect the indicated airspeed. But the true airspeed is basically a sort of calculation of what you're actually getting without the instrument. So it calculates, uses some maths to understand what you're actually travelling at through the air. Okay. So you'll notice that that's actually a bit higher than the ground speed. And the reason for that is we've got a wind that's coming towards us. In fact, I'll get the... see if I can actually get the wind controls on here. So we can actually have a look. Just give us a sec. Okay, I'm just trying to see if I can actually get the wind. Here we go. Let's keep it straight. So, hold up. Okay, we'll leave it at that one. So you can see here, we've got, in the primary flight display, we've got a little wind indicator, and you see that's like an arrow behind us. So that's telling us we've got a headwind. So that's a wind towards us of 3 knots, which explains why the true airspeed is 3 above the ground speed. So obviously the true airspeed, if the wind's coming towards you, then your speed through the air is going to be higher than it is through the ground. Let me just stop, because otherwise I'm going to go straight into the runway. I think we can go a little bit further, so let's give that a go. Just bear with me. Okay. So we'll just keep going. Oh, my throat's a bit dry. I should probably get some water. But we'll just stop by the end of the runway, and then once we're here, we will do some final checks. We'll speak to the ATC saying that we're cleared for takeoff, and then we'll take off. And it should be magnifique. Okay, I need to get a bit more throttle because this is not moving. So one problem with Flight Simulator, the new Flight Simulator, is that the planes are freaking glued to the taxiway. Like, this is not a weak engine. This engine pulls 850 horsepower. Okay, so it's not weak. It should not be needing this much throttle to actually just move. It's kind of stupid. So I'm just going to stop here. I'm just going to turn the parking brake on quickly. Okay, so we're waiting at the end of the runway. We're waiting to take off. We will do the final check. So let's go for the checklist. So before line up, parking brake on. We've got that on. Landing lights on. So the landing lights are the ones on the wings. The taxi light is just the light on the nose. We turn that off for takeoff, and then we just make sure the landing lights are on. So we'll switch the external lights, switch to landing, which basically turns the landing lights on. Navigation lights are on, strobe, we've already turned those on preemptively. Ignition, auto is on as required, and we'll keep that in auto. I believe that should be fine in auto. Aux boost pump to auto, which it is. Fuel selector to auto, which it is. Fuel de-ice system as required. So, as it is cool, and it's 6 degrees at the minute, and it's going to be a lot cooler at 16,000 feet, probably below freezing, so we're going to put on all the de-icing systems. So we'll put the airframe de-ice, prop de-ice, the windshield, the pitot heats, and the stall heats. So the pitot heats are basically going to make sure that that speed reading doesn't get screwed up, because obviously if ice covers the speed pitot, then we'll lose the speed reading, same goes for the altitude. You don't want that to happen, so you want to make sure that your pitot heat, bar anything else, is on, essentially. So we've got the de-ice systems on, we've got those on. Inlet separator is on, yes it is. Trims to take off. So for that, we're going to adjust the trim. Now the trim is basically like a little extra flap on the control surfaces, each of the control surfaces, which controls basically the sort of middle point where the resting point is for the position of that control surface. So if we find that we've let go of the controls and the plane's slowly like raising, the nose is raising or the nose is dropping, then we'll change the trim so it will fly straight. And it's kind of a way of making sure the plane is basically flying straight when we leave the controls for a second, which is useful. So you can see here that we have the trim settings. You'll see that these are here. And we've got one for the elevator, which is this little green selection. We've got the rudder one, and you want to get basically in the green selections. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the elevator, and you can see I can move this now into the green section right in the middle. The rudder, I don't know if I actually have a rudder one. I don't know if I can change the rudder, but we'll mess with the rudder manually when we take off, just because I don't have a key for the rudder trim. We'll just consider them as taking off. Flaps to take off, so we'll set the flaps to take off here. There we go. And you can see now in the thing, we've got the flaps at takeoff in this display here, which will basically allow us to get a bit more lift, so it won't take forever down the runway to take off. That's why we have the flaps. The bleed to auto or max differential, which is already on auto, so that's great. Altimeter settings set check, we've already set those are fine. Altitude selector, we've done that. Don't worry about the transponder, that's not really simulated. We'll get the takeoff checklist, and we'll just have a quick skim through this, as we want to make sure that we're following this. You don't want to be clicking through this when you're like taking off, just because it'll distract you. So make sure the prop RPM, which is this one, it's basically the speed of propeller, is in the green sector, so make sure that that is in the green sector over here. Make sure the torque is at 100%. Rotation speed, pitch up to 10 degrees on the attitude indicator. Positive vertical speed, so basically once you've got a certain climb rate, we'll put the landing gear up. And once the indicated airspeed here is above 115 knots, we'll put the flaps up. Sounds simple enough. Okay. So what we will do for this is we'll put the autopilot on pretty much as soon as we take off, and it should take control of everything with the flight. And what we'll do as well is we'll stick it into nav mode, and what that will do is it will now follow this track. I'll just quickly zoom out of the track so I can show you if it will let me zoom out. Let's go on to MFD maybe. Hold up. There we go. Okay, so we can see our flight path now, and we can zoom in and out of that as much as we want as well. So let's give this a go. So let's go to tower, let's request takeoff clearance. Of course we'll be doing all of this a lot faster in real life, it's just so I can walk you through it. Okay.
Ready for takeoff IFR to Gibraltar.
Okay. Okay, so we've got takeoff clearance, we're going to release the parking brake, we're just going to get going. So I'll acknowledge the takeoff clearance and we'll get started.
Cleared for takeoff runway 10 Sierra Victor 249er.
Righto, here we go, we're moving. Fantastic. Right, I'll keep these windows open just so we can make sure that we're monitoring these things. Okay, just keep that there. Right then, great. Okay, so let's keep that up. And we'll line it with the runway. There we go. Right then, here we go, getting onto the threshold now. We'll just stop at the centre line just to make sure that we are fully lined up, which we are now. Just quickly apply the brakes, there we go. And what we'll quickly do when we do throttle up is we'll just make sure that the engine does throttle up to halfway fine, so we'll just give it up to half throttle. Make sure everything looks good here, which it does. Okay, and we've got steady half throttle there, and we'll put it up to full throttle. Let's go. Okay, now I'll try my best to keep this on the runway, because obviously we are missing that trim a little bit. Okay, so we pitch up when we hit that white mark on the speed indicator, so pretty much about now. I'll give it a little bit more speed because that's for full flaps. Just gently pitch up. There we go. Okay, so pitch up to 10 degrees. We've got a positive rate of climb, gear up. Okay. And now we've got the gear up. We'll just wait until we get to 115 knots and then we'll pull the flaps up as well. So coming up to 115 knots, follow the flight director until we turn the autopilot on, flaps up. And now we'll turn the autopilot on with the Z key. There we go. So now we're contacting Lisbon Centre because we're coming out of the range of the traffic, the tower at the airport. We'll contact Lisbon Centre. Now we've got the autopilot on, the plane is just flying itself now on the path that we set. So just tune Lisbon Centre quick, contact them. We can see some of the scenery now, but very well. Beautiful, look at this. Very pretty. Right, so the temperature in the engine and the torque is looking a bit high, so all we need to do for this is basically put the engine down in power a bit. Should be fine, there we go. So you don't want to have full torque all the time, just because that puts stress on the engine, mainly just for the takeoff. So you basically pull it down a bit. You can see even on like 90% we've got easily enough speed to keep us accelerating. Now another rule, before you get, while you're below 10,000 feet, you need to have your speed below 250 knots. That will be quite easy to maintain in this aircraft because it's not a big commercial jet and it doesn't accelerate super fast. So if we just keep the throttle here, we'll be way below 250 knots before we hit 10,000 feet. It's quite a straight out approach just because we are actually, and obviously the path follows the runway quite exactly, so that's not too much of a problem. However, we will see in a minute that the plane will start turning as we are coming up to the first turn in our path. We'll see this in a second. Might take a while for it to start keying over. Absolutely beautiful, look at this. Absolutely gorgeous looking game. It's one of the things I love most about this. Okay, so we're coming through 4,000 feet. Great. And it should be turning now. Let's just make sure it is on FMS. Okay, I think actually what we're doing is we're flying to this waypoint first and then we'll turn, which is why we're not following that route directly. It should turn, there we go, so we see this is flicked across and now we are turning to the next waypoint, which is FR621. So you can see we're now turning to that waypoint. Excellent. Okay, so we'll just let it climb to 11,000 feet, and we'll just check the time we've got as well. And while we're climbing, we'll just go to the after takeoff checklist. So the landing gear is up, the flaps are up, torque is at max at 100, yep, DI system is required, and the inertial separator, we will now turn that off because we don't need it. We will also turn off the landing lights. Okay, so we're on the climb now, so altitude selector check, it is at 11,000 feet, altimeter setting as required, that's already fine. When we're above 10,000 feet, we normally switch to the standard air pressure, which is obviously 29.92. Just because above that altitude we will have that standard pressure. Fuel gauges check, the fuel gauges are fine. Let's just drop the power a bit as we are over 100% torque. There we go. Okay. DI system is required, it's already on, that's fine. And that separator is off. Landing lights off, so we'll turn the landing lights off now as we don't need them. There we go. So they're just talking to the people on the radio. And we're all good. Just flick over to the cruise checklist. We'll use that obviously when we reach our cruising altitude, which we haven't yet. And we'll see where we go from there. Okay, great. So here we are. Welcome to flight, everyone. In the TBM 930. What a pretty looking plane. It's a pretty looking plane, it's a pretty looking sky. I tell you what, I love the water effects they have with these kind of currents. I absolutely love that. That is a beautiful effect. It's stunning. And all the satellite imagery as well. It just looks great. It's a freaking great looking game. Looks like there's some clouds over there, but generally the weather is pretty spot on. So here we go, we're just turning a little bit again. Now, what I'll do, just to make sure this is in scale, I'll just zoom out a little bit more from this map. Zoom out really far, you can see our whole route. So we're going to fly a little bit up towards the coast, so this Iraq waypoint, and then we're going to take a right turn, almost 90 degrees, and we're going to head all the way to Gibraltar. So it's not a very long flight, it's telling us, let's see, we've got 4 minutes to the next objective, and then we've got probably another 20 minutes to the airport. So it's not a long flight at all. I deliberately chose that so the video wouldn't take me hours to make, because that would suck. And we'll keep going, so we'll just leave it for a bit and we'll see what happens when we get higher up. Should be great. Drop the throttle again, because you will, as you get higher up, you'll need to drop the throttle more and more to stay below 100% torque. It's a bit of a balancing act. There we go. Okay. So we're coming up to 11,000 feet now. As we are above 10,000, we can accelerate as much as we want. Now, for this aircraft, the maximum... Here we go, it's telling us to climb to 16,000 feet. So what we'll do there is we'll set the altitude selector to 16,000. Like that. And then what we'll need to do now is we'll need to change the vertical speed to adapt to that climb. So if we go to vertical speed... Oh, we'll set it a bit lower now because we are a bit higher up, so we'll set it to 16,000. 1,600. Yes, we copied, don't worry. Okay. So now we're climbing to 16,000 feet. Just get a bit more throttle in the engine. A little bit less than that. Okay. So you can see now that obviously we have to constantly drop the throttle to keep the torque in, just because the higher the engine gets up, the more it's sort of stressed with the thinner air. Now the cruising speed, in terms of true airspeed, which is this figure here, is about, I think, just around 300 knots for the TBM. So obviously that will increase as we get higher up because the pressure will change. We'll obviously have a lower pressure air higher up, so the speed in our instruments will be less because there's less air hitting that sensor, but our actual speed will still be, you know, the same. So we'll just see when we get up to cruising altitude what that means, but we should be looking at the higher end of 200 knots, the sort of higher end bound of 200, 300 knots with this when we're at our cruising altitude, which is fine. We're currently doing 235, which is quite quick for a small plane. Okay, game's running very well at the minute as well, I think just because we haven't got much cloud and this is just a small plane, so I haven't got my FPS counter, but I'm going to predict this is about 40 or 50 FPS, which is great. You can't expect brilliant performance with this game, like not great performance, just because it is very intensive. I'm only running a RTX 2060 and a Ryzen 7 2700. By all means, they're good hardware, but this game really favours top-end hardware like RTX 30 series cards and all of that, which I don't have. I don't have the money for that, to be honest. Okay. Now this is purely a little silly thing. This doesn't make any effect, but I'll just set the aircon so it's reasonable, just for role-playing purposes. You know, got to have them fake passengers in the back, all comfortable. Okay, so we're coming across. Is that a little bit of turbulence I see? See a little bit of turbulence there. Clear air turbulence. Generally very smooth though, let's be honest. Right, coming up to 16,000 feet, and we're also about to make our turn at the Newark waypoint to Gibraltar, so I'll just zoom in quickly. It's asking us to contact the next centre, so we'll just do that as well. So let's just acknowledge a handoff. And now we're turning.
Going to 118.275 kilohertz 249.
Okay, let's just tune the centre. So it's just radio handoffs basically, and we'll also drop the throttle a little bit, just as we are a bit high in torque again. There we go. So a lot of flying, especially for a long flight. This is sort of the smallest plane you can really do this properly in. You'll be using autopilot a lot, just because it's the easiest way to do things. Let me just quickly zoom out a little bit as well, so you can see how far I've got to go. Okay, so judging visually, we've got this bay to cross, and then we're going to cross over the peninsula of Gibraltar itself, which is this one. I can't quite see over that, so I'm guessing it's just over the horizon, our landing spot. And it's saying we've got about 24 minutes until we're landing, which is great. And we're just coming up to our cruising altitude of 16,000 feet. Now the TBM is actually a very high altitude aircraft for a turboprop. You can get up to 30,000 feet in this, which is almost the height of airliners. In fact, some airliners, that is the cruising altitude of some airliners, which is very high actually. And it can obviously do that because it's a turboprop and it's a jet engine. You would not be able to do that in a standard piston plane. It would just not work. Not easily anyway. So it can fly quite high, and because it can fly high, it can fly quite fast. You can see our speed now is coming up into the high 200s, and we should be able to fly a bit over 300 knots true airspeed in this plane, which means we can get places pretty quick. For reference, that's about sort of 2/3, 3/4 as fast as an airliner at a reasonable speed. So it's pretty fast as small planes go. And a lot of this is now just sitting and waiting, taking in the nice views. They are very nice. We've got the sea on the right, got some weather in the distance, and we've got the ground down there. I think this is also a good opportunity to have a look at the different modes in the aircraft itself, in the displays, so I can show you what's going on with that. So there is actually a weather radar in this aircraft, so I mentioned the weather over there. We can actually see this weather in the radar as well. Now, it's not the best day to test this because, as you can see, there is not much weather to speak of, so we're not going to pick up much. We might pick up some of this over here. It's normally in a sort of 45-degree cone in the front of the aircraft, which is obviously what's relevant. So, if I remember how to do this, let's get onto WX radar controls. Maybe it's down here. Let's remember. Okay, so we're on to MFD, which is the middle display. And we'll just see if we can put on weather. There you go. So we can see on the map now it's picking up the weather on the radar. I do actually remember now there is a 360-degree weather radar on this, which is convenient. So you can see here we've got green, which is very light weather. We've got orange, which is a bit more moderate, and we've got a few patches of clouds here as well. So it's very good weather generally. We can change this as well. So here's the vertical weather. So this is that cone I said in front of the aircraft. So you can see obviously we've got some clouds over here at about 75 miles away, which are these ones. You can see in the distance. It's all green with only a couple of bits of orange, so they're very minor, and it's not in our way anyway, so there's no problem. We can also have vertical weather. Obviously we can't see this because vertical weather is pretty much directly in front, and that's obviously looking down and above, like up and down rather than left and right. So we don't really need weather indicator on here. I don't think we're going to need that today, so we'll just turn the radar off if we can do that. Put it back on map, there we go. Okay. Right, so our speed is coming up on 300 knots now. If you are an attentive listener, you might have heard in the background, although the audio is quite a bit more of a wind noise building up. That's just because we're getting quite fast now. We're just speeding up. Check the instruments. Engine torque's at 95 to 96%. That's absolutely ideal. No warning things about the yaw dampener, except the yaw dampener being off, which we don't really need at this point anyway. We should be all great. So let me just pop to okay. Great. So that's it pretty much. We just let it fly. Alright guys, so that's pretty much all there is to starting up taxi, takeoff, climb and cruise of the TBM 930 in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I promise not all the videos that I upload to this channel will be this long. It's literally just because I wanted to get as much detail in as possible. And of course I do ramble a bit because I'm quite passionate about aviation. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I will be probably posting a couple more like this, but hopefully my other videos will be quite a bit shorter. And I'll see you guys next time.